Professor Brahma Chilani, one of India's foremost voices on matters military and strategy, who joins us on this India Today special broadcast. And also joining us in a moment would be Air Chief Marshal R.K. Bhadoria. But for the moment, only Professor Brahma Chilani and Air Marshal Chaudhary on a very specific issue that we want to discuss. Professor Brahma Chilani, you heard the Indian Army, Navy and Air Force, the Director Generals of Military Operation. Do you still feel that this was a situation where the Indian Armed Forces should not have called off Operation Sindoor when they were virtually, do you still feel it's like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory?
Today's briefing by the military officers reinforces the fact that India had the upper hand militarily, and this abrupt halt to military operations after just 3 days caught everyone by surprise, including members of Modi's cabinet. If we inflicted so much damage in 3 days, we could have at least continued inflicting heavy blows for a few more days. Why did we just abruptly end an operation that began on the 7th? 3 days later, on the 10th, we announced dramatically an end to hostilities without achieving clear objectives. Now, if you go by what we have done in terms of the inflicting damage, will that deter Pakistani military establishment from continuing its proxy war by employing terrorists, the killing of 35 to 40 Pakistani military personnel, the damage to some of their air bases? Will that be sufficient? Or, given the fact that we had degraded their air defenses, shouldn't we have pressed home that advantage to inflict far more costs on the Pak military before agreeing to a ceasefire? And then
Let me take that to Air Marshal Chaudhary. Sir, you've raised a very pertinent point, and perhaps majority or a very large section in this country perhaps think exactly the same thing, Air Marshal Chaudhary. We had the advantage. We were punishing them. We've bled for decades. When Pakistan was bleeding, we said okay to a ceasefire. Air Marshal Chaudhary.
I think at the outset, I think it's really not a classical ceasefire. It's it's sort of a seizure of military operations. That's what it is. Because when they continued firing, the opportunity, again, a free hand was given. But the point here is, militaries do what they're tasked to do. That is the first aspect. Second thing is, it's very, if I may be a little blunt here, that it is very easy for spectators to comment on pushing our nation to a higher level of conflict when the price of war is actually truly known to the soldiers. They know it. So the point is, when you look at the larger national interest, there must have been huge amount of parleys or discussions and at this, and the decision which has come about would have been most certainly in the best interest of the nation. So the military doesn't want to question that. We would love, I'm sure the military would love to go the whole hog, but we are a very responsible military, which follows a higher governmental direction.
Let me get Professor Chilani to come in on that. Sir, a considered decision. There was classification of aim that we will punish terror. 9 terror hubs punished, devastating strikes, 100+ terrorists killed. That aim achieved. When Pakistan escalated, 11 military targets in Pakistan destroyed. That aim achieved. Aim achieved, operations come to a standstill. What was the higher aim that you thought India could have achieved, Professor Chilani?
First, the military carries out a mission whose objectives have been set by the political leadership. The military doesn't set those political objectives. The military is given a task to accomplish. Now, if you look at modern military history, I can't think of a 3-day operation anywhere in the world, including by a superpower, that achieved lasting results. The only classic case of a short military operation that rewrote history was Israel's Six-Day War in 1967,
Yes.
a war in which Israel took its neighbors by complete surprise. They were caught napping. Israel grabbed the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights, all in a 6-day war. Now, that
Yes.
was achievable because nobody expected Israel to launch an offensive. Now, in this
Okay.
uh, case, we gave Pakistan all the time to prepare for an Indian military offensive, right? We could have drawn lessons from the Balakot airstrike and kept plans ready to strike
Yes.
when a major terrorist massacre occurred to catch Pakistan by surprise. That is
Okay.
swift retribution. No, we decided that we will do it at a time of a choosing. So it was clear to Pakistan that India's armed forces were going to hit Pakistan, and we gave them 15 days to fortify the defenses. So, given that 3 days, you cannot achieve any lasting outcome. After all, when history is written, or when we look back 10 years hence
Okay.
as to what Operation Sindoor achieved, it'll have to be measured in terms of what follows.
That's a very
Not in
interesting
terms of
point to
what
make. Very interesting point to make. Let me get Air Marshal Chaudhary to respond to that, so that every point that is raised, let's get a counter view on that and arrive at a conclusion. Air Marshal Chaudhary, when history is made, while we've struck terror and in those military bases, not much achieved.
Where is this a war? It's just an operation which is spread over 3 days. When you quote history of war, then the nation has to be at war. Swift retribution is overstated unless and until you keep the context in mind. We are when have we had a war in the recent times against two nuclear powers? So we have to keep a lot of context in mind, and I think context matters. And in this case, yes, I mean I agree at a point that what will history say that down the line on this outcomes of this operation? But we also know that, and I've seen history has repeated itself again and again, and especially let's take the case of Israel. That hasn't stopped war. Israel has been not even been able to deter uh, beyond the terror. Yes, you can carry on. You can't kill an ideology. So the point here is that we are a long way from war. This was an operation, a very punitive operation for a very specific purpose. The grade and the scale of the purpose was very carefully calibrated. As far as the plans are concerned, I mean, I am very sure the entire planning this time around would have been taken to right up to the full scale of conventional spectrum, and they are ready and in place. Should should the neighbor decide to escalate it? I think that's a significant aspect we need to bear in mind.
Fair enough. Professor Chilani, 35, yes, sir, 35 to 40 military personnel killed, 100 plus terrorists killed, 11 military bases or air bases targeted. Does that send across a message that India means business? Next time, the strikes would be not just demonstrative, but punitive?
Gaurav, military operations between nuclear armed states are not new. China and the Soviet Union clashed on their border. It was a limited border war.
Yes.
The Ukraine war involves the world's biggest nuclear powers in direct confrontation with the three Western nuclear powers taking on Russia. And another nuclear armed country, North Korea, has joined on the side of Russia. that confrontation carries global risks, to humanity, to the destruction of the world. So Pakistan having nukes should not deter India from accomplishing its political objectives. Now, let me be clear on what India's goal was. India's goal was not to end terrorism once and for all. Pakistan is the world's largest terror factory.
Yes.
This factory will keep churning out jihadi terrorists, given the vast terror infrastructure that has been built in Pakistan. We killed 100 plus terrorists. That's nothing. These terrorists are expendable for the Pak military generals. They are cannon fodder. The jihadi factories in Pakistan will churn hundreds more. And hitting 9 terror camps in Pakistan does not take out the terror infrastructure in Pakistan because, as I said, there is a deep nexus between the Pak military and terrorism. Terrorism is
Interesting.
state reared, state nurtured,
Yes.
and employed by the state as an instrument of policy. The objective of Operation Sindoor was more limited, as outlined by the Prime Minister himself. The objective was to impose punitive costs on the Pakistani military establishment so as
Yes.
to deter further cross border terror attacks for fear of inviting harsher retribution. If we had
Interesting you should
inflicted,
mention that. So this is not punitive enough for you, and I want to get Air Marshal Chaudhary to respond to that, because Professor Chelani, I want to come back to you on 2 points which virtually everyone I've spoken to in the past 2 days, 3 days have said. Their hopes were that there would be stricter action against Pakistan, stricter. I mean, for people like us, Muridke and Bahawalpur being targeted is immense. Sargoda being targeted it's almost like out of the syllabus even for the Pakistan army. I'm sure they never thought Sargoda would be targeted. But perhaps, is that the new normal that's being set? But M. Marshal Chaudhary, you had your hand up. You wanted to respond that this is not punitive enough. This will not deter the Pakistan army. In fact, the radical elements in the army will train the next generation of Hafiz Saeed and the next generation of that Maulana of terror, Masood Azhar.
Deterrence against supporting terror, I think, is a tenuous game. The challenge here is when you have a military whose existence is revolves around creating an existential threat of a neighbor, the dynamics change a bit. The point was, I think I don't think there's any debate on the fact that you can't root out terror. You can't root out an ideology. To punish in a manner where the power brokers who control terror, who by their own words have stated in the past that the terror is a strategic instrument of the statecraft. I think that lesson, and it's a different world today. Earlier days, if you remember, most of the Western countries uh, were pretty cynical about India's terror situation. Things have changed now. I think there is no doubt in anyone's mind of the Pakistani's army's linkages with terror and
Yes.
the and the fact that it is almost like a terror state. It's a nurturer of terror, and I think that's one lesson which has gone across loud and clear to the world over. So there's a
Okay.
huge difference here.
Let me get Professor Chilani to respond to that. The fact that Sargoda has been targeted, the fact that Bolari Air Base has been targeted, the fact that Noor Khan Air Base has been targeted, 11 military bases all across from Skardu to Sindh targeted. You don't think that will deter Pakistan, Professor Chilani?
Gaurav, there are two things: diplomatic and military. Let me start with diplomatic. Operation Sindoor was designed to open the world's eyes to Pakistan's sponsorship of cross border terrorism. We allowed US persuasion to abruptly halt our military operation without pressing home our advantages. The last time the US intervened in 1999, that intervention resulted in President Clinton averting all out war by pressuring the then Pakistani PM Nawaz Sharif to withdraw invading Pakistani forces from Kargil. This time, the US mediation has helped bail out Pakistan from India's military reprisals without the US acknowledging, let alone seeking to address, the central issue, the core issue that triggered the military hostilities, which is Pakistan's asymmetric warfare through terrorist proxies. Look at Trump, what he has said. Look at other Western leaders. Look at the G7 foreign minister statement. None of these people even mention cross-border terrorism as an issue. They're all singing Pakistan's line, Pakistan's, they're taking the page from Pakistan's playbook. They're saying Kashmir is the core issue. A solution has to be arrived at to solve this problem. So, because we inconclusively ended Operation Sindoor, the international spotlight has now fallen on the Kashmir issue as the core issue, while the central issue, the core issue for India, cross-border terrorism, has been ignored. Why has this happened, Gaurav? Because success brings respect, and when you conclude something in a manner abruptly without showing the outcome, you will definitely face challenge to your narrative. This is
But
India's...
sir, the outcome is visible. If Jacobabad has been targeted, if Sargodha has been targeted, if Pakistan has been compelled to acknowledge to its people, I don't know if they will, that their air defense systems has been taken down. Is that not demonstrating capability? SIAD, complete suppression of enemy's air defenses, Professor Chilani. Before I bring in Marshal Chaudhary to conclude, Professor Chilani, please go on, sir.
Yes, I'm glad that you raised that question. India should have brought its superior military power to bear on Pakistan in a way to impose high punitive costs from the word go, Where we had overwhelming power, like naval power, we did not employ. Where we managed to achieve dominance by degrading their air defenses, we did not press home that advantage. You saw the satellite images of Noor Khan Air Base in Rawalpindi. We destroyed only a part of it. We should have destroyed the whole of it. They can rebuild the damaged, the destroyed part within a few months, maybe a few weeks. So when you launch an operation that was designed to inflict punitive costs, those costs should have been such as to drive home a lesson so that you do not face repeated attacks from a country that has waged with impunity cross-border terrorism for 4 decades.
Let me take that
last point,
Go on, sir. Go on, sir.
If our intent was only to mount a military offensive for 3 days, let me be clear, we would have been better off by keeping Pakistan under sustained military and diplomatic pressure rather than launching Operation Sindoor. That is without kinetic action. We could have achieved more, prevented this rehyphenation of India and Pakistan. We could have prevented this international spotlight now being cast on Kashmir as the core issue had we kept Pakistan under sustained military and diplomatic pressure without resorting to the use of force. But when we employed force, after 3 days, why did we succumb to US pressure? That's a question the country is asking.
Did we succumb to US pressure? Okay. Okay, Air Marshal Chaudhary, you want to quickly take that? When we were punishing them, we should have gone the entire way. I mean, Professor Chilani says there's no half pregnancy. When you were doing it, you might as well have destroyed his entire airbase. Why just a part of it? Why just a couple of hangars? Why just one part of the runway? Why not aircraft that were there on the parked on the taxiway or in that at that airbase?
Gaurav, it's only when you understand the real nuances of targeting, aerial targeting, you'll appreciate that when you hit a target from 200 kilometers away, those targets systems are destroyed on a certain, what should I say, certain performance capabilities of the weapon system. Once the weapon is launched at those distances, is the targeting is done on specific coordinates and on specific from intelligence and a whole lot of other assessments on the target penetration and the kind of targeting it is. You can't switch a target just because you saw an aircraft there, because your larger target is, I mean, once the results start coming out of what we actually hit, because what you're just seeing are bare satellite imagery. You don't know today what exactly has been hit, because it looks like in our open area we've gone and hit a target. So there is clear specific intelligence on which those areas and those specific target systems have been hit. One.
Fair enough.
Second, a lot of these airfields which you target, they're huge target systems. To carry out an attack on an airfield, to destroy an airfield, needs an immense amount of effort. It's not something which you can, hit so many targets together. But our ability to target so many targets over a period of time, where depth line right into the center of gravity of some of the depth bases, which are
Fair enough.
critical targets. Those are actually centers of gravity of the Pakistani Air Force and the military as well. So when you do that, you send a clear message. You look that this is what I can do, and you can continue doing it. But the whole thing is, for the first time, I think India shredded the notion that the terrorists are separated from the terrorist backers. That has been made
Absolutely,
clear.
and I will show those images. I will show those images of Pakistan Army being at the janaza of those terrorists, because that's where clearly sent out that message, and that inhibition of targeting Pakistan and Pakistan's Punjab, that's been removed completely. Professor Brahmachilani and Air Marshal Chaudhary, as always, for joining me here on this India Today special broadcast with your views. Many, many thanks. India has sent across a message. Will Pakistan read it? That remains the big question.